Hello everybody, Dokkan Assets here. Today we are back with another figure video and a very special figure video at that. We are once again doing the annual top 5 best and worst figures of the year. Obviously, this video starting off with the top 5 worst figures of this year. We've had some blunders this year for sure, and I cannot wait to talk about them. However, before we get into that, I do have a very important announcement for you all. I'm actually going to be moving all of my Dragon Ball figure unboxing content onto a brand new channel, Dokkan Assets Unboxing. I'm doing this because recently I've been noticing that whenever I'm uploading a figure unboxing or figure news, it seems like that it isn't doing as well as it used to, and I'm pretty sure that that's just because the Dokkan content on the channel has been doing better lately, which is weird because like this is such an odd problem to have because it's good that the Dokkan content is doing good, obviously, and I want it to do good, but I don't want the figure unboxing content to do bad, and I feel like it's just sort of getting lost in the slew of Dokkan content that's obviously more frequent than the figure unboxing content. So I decided that I wanted to ask all of you before I made this decision. I asked on Twitter and on the YouTube community tab with a poll if you guys thought that I should make a separate channel for this, and it seemed like the majority of you wanted it. It also just seems to be the wise decision at this point, obviously with the direction that the channel is going in. Moving all of the Dragon Ball figure unboxing content to another channel just seems like the right move to do. Plus then that way that channel can grow and sort of get search terms associated with it that's just Dragon Ball figures. So I'm obviously not going to remove any of the Dragon Ball figure videos from this channel. Those are just going to stay there. But I will probably be uploading maybe like 3 more after I'm done with this video, and obviously the top 5 best of the year, just to make sure that people get the memo. Hey, all of the content is going onto that channel as well. Actually, this video and the top 5 best, as well as future figure unboxings, like I said, and future figure news will be going up on that channel. I'll probably also be re-uploading a couple older ones just to kind of keep the ball rolling, and when I don't have a new figure unboxing, then I can just re-upload an old one. So keep an eye out for that. Obviously, if you're one of my people who loves the figure unboxing content and isn't here for Dokkan, thank you so much for sticking with it, despite obviously the slew of Dokkan content and only like 1 or 2 figure unboxings a month. I really appreciate the fact that you're still willing to stay here and stay subbed regardless of all of that, so thank you. And especially, you know, thank you to everybody for just enjoying the figure unboxing content. So definitely go check out that channel, but enjoy the rest of the video. Thank you for sitting through that little mini segment, and we're going to get started with our video. Now, if you've been around for last year's video, you would remember that there are a couple of rules in place. First of all, we are not going to be doing any shenanigans like we did last year because of how we had the thing where, you know, I couldn't get some of the figures that I wanted and some of the bad figures, and they didn't count because, you know, world events and all that stuff, you know, that the rules from last year on the screen. So we're just gonna slash that last one. We're just getting rid of it, and it's basically the top 2 are all we're going to be abiding by this year, which of course would be, for one, I need to actually own the figure. And of course, this rule is a little bit harder for the, you know, least favorite figures or the worst figures, because obviously if I see a figure is bad, I'm not going to go out of my way to buy it, right? Most of the time that's just a blunder where it looks good in the beginning and then I get it and it's bad. So this list is more going to be like my top 5 most disappointing figures of the year, because I don't think that any of these figures, maybe except for number 1, are necessarily really bad, right? It was just like something about them made me kind of go, oh man. But that is where rule number 2 comes in, which is obviously honorable mentions. Honorable mentions are figures that I either will never buy or don't own, right? That maybe I would still like to get despite them being bad, which really isn't the case for our worst list here. But basically our honorable mention section is going to be everything else that I would have put on this list that I didn't actually own myself. But I just feel personally it's not fair for me to judge a figure, even if by looking at literally all the pictures and even like seeing it in person but not getting to hold it, I feel like it's just not fair to properly give it that absolute worst, you know, because I need to judge it for myself. So, with all that being said, let's go ahead and get into the honorable mentions. So this time around, I decided that obviously we are still going to do a couple of individual figures, but some of these are going to be sort of put into a group because they're just that bad or their entire line is terrible. So to start us off, we just have a general overview of figure reusing. Obviously, if you have been around the channel this year and you have been watching the figure news, which is going to go up on that other channel, by the way, I forgot to mention that in the beginning. But if you've been watching the figure news, you would know that we have been talking a lot this year about Bandai reusing sculpts and reusing molds for various different figures, which is obviously a big no-no because of course you want what you're buying to be original, and a lot of digital modeling shenanigans, right? Taking pieces from different figures to make one new figure. And the problem is that isn't necessarily bad on its own. It is just kind of like, I don't want to say stinky because it seems like such a silly word to use, but it just does kind of stink because it's like, man, I want to be buying an original product, right? But then a lot of the time it comes out as inaccuracies, right? Either the figure doesn't look good and the pose doesn't really make sense, or you'll have cases where it doesn't make sense to the source material, right? Like, even though Goku's gi is generally the same, there are small differences between the different source materials that the figure is supposed to be based off of. And obviously when you combine different parts and figures, it just ends up not making sense. So wanted to just kind of throw that into a big bubble because of course that's like your Gokus, your Brolys, your Gogetas this year have done a lot of that. I know a big notorious one that we've talked about a lot is the Omnibus Blue Goku from that recent Ichiban Kuji set. Not only does that figure just not really make any sense because it's on the ground when that scene is in the air, but the legs just look really awkward, and obviously they're not the Broly movie boots either on the figure. So very unfortunate. I hope we see less of that next year, but I'm not keeping my fingers crossed. We also, speaking of, not keeping my fingers crossed, I'm not keeping my fingers crossed for the future of this line, which is ironic considering what I'm going to say at the end of the segment, but the Solid Edgeworks line is next up on our list here, and from the beginning of this line, we were already destined for some shenanigans, because obviously this line started off with the Super Saiyan Goku walking forward, which actually looked pretty promising. This was a very interesting concept for a figure, and obviously a lot of people were kind of under the impression that the whole line would be like this, right? We would have figures that are all walking forward, maybe a whole Z Fighters line, right? That would be something that would be pretty cool, and honestly I would have, you know, definitely wanted to collect. However, that didn't come to fruition. To start with Goku himself, obviously this was when all of the stuff began with Vietnam making some of these figures that eventually get shipped off to Japan as prize figures, right? This year we sort of learned that some of the figures are being made in China and some of the figures are being made in Vietnam, and 9 times out of 10 we've seen like maybe 2 instances where a figure from Vietnam has been good. All the figures that have been produced in Vietnam have been awful, whether they don't look like the original sculpt, the original production images, right? They have problems with the sculpt, like for Goku himself, he leaned like crazy. It was disgusting, frankly. You also have cases where the character just doesn't look like the character. Moving on to the second figure in the set, which was Trunks. Ugh! This figure was disgusting. And it was pretty exciting in the beginning because it's like, oh wow, an armored Trunks, right? With his hair pulled back. Like, I don't think I've ever seen that as a figure before. That's super cool as a concept. But the original production I'm losing my words because this figure is so bad. I'm envisioning it in my mind. Obviously, this is all post-editing, but it's scaring me. In post-production, bro. Crazy. But the figure was so bad, right? From the beginning, it kind of looked unpromising, and then obviously once we got the finals, everybody was like, what is this abomination to mankind? Not only was the Trunks figure himself a huge L at the end of the day, it also made no sense for the line, because it was like, okay, well now we have Goku walking forward and Trunks just standing there, so what is this line going for? Then we get to Vegito, and he's just standing there. I coined the phrase for this man, Mom, it's my turn on the Xbox, Vegito, because that's exactly what he looks like. He literally looks like he's waiting his turn to play for his big brother being there, right? He just doesn't look good. He doesn't look like Vegito either. And again, he's just standing there. So it's like, okay, well, what is this line supposed to be? And then, of course, we have the newest figure, and that was Vegeta. And he returns to the walking forward thing. So it's like, okay, well, now I really don't know what this line is supposed to be. And this figure still looks terrible. So overall, the Solid Edgeworks line is just not a good line. It has not had a good rep from the start. It has not had good figures in the line. It may actually be saved. We'll have to see. Well, I don't think you could redeem all of that, to be honest. But we may have a savior in the darkness with the upcoming Super Saiyan 1 and 2 Gohan. They continue the theme of walking forward like the rest of the Z fighters. Oh, I guess except for Trunks. But those figures from the production images that we've seen so far actually look really, really good. So only time will tell. That figure is going to be produced in Vietnam, so we'll have to see. And that is actually a figure that has caught the attention of a lot of non-collectors. Like, there are some times that some Dragon Ball figures sort of trickle out into the masses, and I see like the general populace get excited about them, and either I'm like, yes, you should be excited for this, or oh boy. Moving on from the Solid Edgeworks line, we have the end. So this is actually something to celebrate, which is ironic in the worst list here. But we have the Retsuden line finally ending. Woo! Now, why is this stinky, awful figure line, who also made it into last year's video, in fact, in the thumbnail with the Retsuden Bardock, why is this line back in the spotlight? Well, to sort of really put the nail in the coffin how terrible this line is, we got the Super Saiyan God, and Super Saiyan Blue Evolution Vegeta. This one isn't the worst, because at least the sculpting on the figure is okay, right? It's definitely not what the Retsuden line is like. It's not the bottom of the barrel for the Retsuden line, is what I'm trying to say, right? However, this figure really didn't make any sense, because all these forms of Vegeta are supposed to have a different body type. But obviously, because Bandai is lazy, and the Retsuden line just reuses the sculpt from a previous iteration, my gosh, this figure's so bad it's giving me conniptions. Because, obviously, Vegeta is supposed to have these different body types, you know, the way that they do it with the Retsuden line, reusing the original sculpt, just doesn't make sense. God is supposed to be a little bit more slimmer, right? Super Saiyan is supposed to be a little bit more buff, and obviously Blue is neither of those things. It's sort of in its own category, right? It's buff, but also not the same kind of buff as Super Saiyan, so really just didn't make sense. And obviously the fact that this line reared its ugly little head one more time before it finally hit the coffin was just really unfortunate. But thank you, Retsuden line. Glad you're finally over. The light in the darkness, really. Now, we are on our final two of the honorable mentions here, and these are probably, at least in my opinion, the worst two. The last one I'm kind of saving, you know, these weren't really in any particular order, but these were definitely the worst. Absolutely the worst, right? So, for our sort of second worst in the honorable mentions, we have the History Box Goku Volume 2. Now, why is this figure so bad? A couple of reasons. For one, this figure unfortunately got the Vietnam treatment. Just like I was explaining with the Solid Edgeworks line, this figure was unfortunately created in Vietnam for all of the copies that got shipped to Japan, and oh boy, did he end up looking awful. And the real shame with this figure, and the reason why he's so, I guess, technically high on the list, right, at least in the honorable mentions, is that so many people were excited for this guy. This is one of those figures that, again, like I was talking about before, sort of trickled into the greater Dragon Ball populace of people getting really excited for this figure, right, outside of just the very, you know, niche collecting community. This figure was pretty hyped up. People were excited for this guy. Obviously, Bye Guy's Goku is a really, really impactful moment in the series and a moment that people really, really love. So obviously getting a figure to encapsulate that is just fantastic, right? Obviously, even having the rock base, the smoke in the background, right? Of course, the iconic pose on Goku and the original sculpting not looking too bad, to be honest with you. And the finals came through, and everybody was disappointed. This figure just looked so ugly. It was very, very unfortunate to see what became of ya boy. I really wish that this figure would have ended up looking a little bit better. A little bit is, I think, an understatement. I really wish it would have looked a lot better, because then, you know, everybody who was so hyped up for it obviously would have been able to get what they were looking for, and we wouldn't have had another stinky figure on our hands. Finally, for our honorable mentions, I feel like most of you probably saw this one coming from a mile away. This was the first figure that I have ever made a solo figure news video on. That's right, we're talking about the Banpresto World Figure Coliseum Super Master Stars piece Super Saiyan Blue Gogeta. Now, I know that this figure, just at the end of the day, right, doesn't look bad. I can tell you that everything that we've talked about, sorry, I just punched the mic, up until this point, right, has absolutely been worse in terms of the sculpt, right? Maybe except for some of the reusing. Maybe some of those may have looked a little bit better, but, you know, still kind of unfortunate because they reused a bunch of parts. Oh boy, this one was a little bit of doozy, because I don't think I've ever seen drama before in the figure collecting community. It's like, oh boy, I have my Goku shaped plastic in my hand. Like, what drama is there to come? But obviously, the World of Figure Coliseum is something that Banpresto, now technically Bandai because they own Banpresto, puts on every single year. And when it comes to the Figure Coliseum, the whole point is that different sculptors from around the world come through. Well, now it is around the world. Originally, it was just Japanese sculptors. But ironically enough, that it's called Banpresto World Figure Coliseum, and they didn't have sculptors from around the world before. Just funny. But I digress, right? Of course, the whole point of this festival is that you have people from different cultures, different parts of the world come in and create their own sculpt of a particular character, right? And they get to choose the character. It's really cool because obviously every year from this, we not only get some very different sculpt styles than we're used to for different Dragon Ball figures, we also get some characters that you wouldn't usually see as prize figures that usually aren't as marketed, which is really cool. Now, obviously, having the Broly movie, you know, sort of come out around that time, not really, but like it's still popular, of course. I mean, it still is now, obviously. We had a Gogeta be a part of that set, and of course, you know, this was sculpted by, I'm going to put his name on screen because I don't want to butcher it. But his name is on screen here, and essentially, what Bandai did is instead of taking his original sculpt, right, what they did is they took a bunch of pieces, like we were talking about before with reusing, right, and the digital modeling shenanigans. They took a bunch of pieces from some other Gogeta Blue figures, and they smashed them together, added some digital modeling rather than hand sculpting, and they made this Gogeta Blue rather than the original one. Which not only just obviously defeats the entire purpose of the World Figure Coliseum, that, you know, you're getting a figure that's sculpted by this person and they put their heart and soul into it. It's super disrespectful to the sculptor because it's literally just changing their artwork. And I mean, I know it's not Bandai saying, oh, your artwork isn't good enough, so we're going to change it. But it's just a huge, you know, like spit in the face, like a huge slap in the face. I need a better metaphor to use because it's really bad. Thankfully, though, in this situation, the guy who actually sculpted the figure wasn't too hurt by it. He did say, you know, technically they can do whatever they want with it because the company owns the rights to do whatever they want with it. So at least he was a good sport about it and he wasn't too hurt by it, which was good to see. But a lot of people were really mad about this. And obviously, you know, this just goes to show that not only is Bandai super lazy a lot of the time, but this is just like the ultimate laziness because what they can do is that instead of having to create a whole new sculpt for the figure, they just take pieces that they already have, put it together, and save a boatload of money, and then just pump it out, and people will buy it thinking that it's the original unless they're informed, or, you know, they just see a Gogeta figure on the shelf and they decide to purchase it. So, very unfortunate situation with that whole thing. I don't think that the end result figure, like I said in the beginning, ended up too bad. I mean, I guess at least it looked good and it didn't look bad, but above all else, super disrespectful to the artist, and I'm really hoping that they not only let him in again to maybe go through a redemption arc and kick Bandai's butt, but also I'm kind of hoping that they do away with the Super Master Stars piece shenanigans that they did with the World Figure Coliseum, because obviously it took so long for all of those figures to come out. And I mean, think about it, that was the 2019 Figure Coliseum that this figure was technically supposed to be a part of, and it only came out this year. And literally they only had 4 sculptors this time instead of, like, I think they usually have like 8 or something like that. Because obviously they did bigger figures this time rather than regular prize figures. So, I don't know. I'm hoping they just kind of restart the whole thing and start fresh, because this year was just a whole big mess. It's crazy that we got literally last year's best figure from this, and this year's probably would have been the worst, obviously, if I would have had the physical figure in my hand, of course. Kicking off our list with the figures that I actually reviewed this year, we have at the number 5 slot the Chojin Giga Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta. Now, this entry might not surprise some of you, considering that with this figure, I was already kind of on the fence in the video that I actually opened him up. I don't think that this is a bad figure by any means, and I actually like this figure. I don't even have buyer's remorse for buying this figure, but I definitely think that just in terms of all the figures that I opened up this year, he was one of the weakest. His face sculpt is okay, it's not bad, but I feel like it doesn't encapsulate Gogeta enough. As well, this figure also did have a lot of QC issues. Luckily enough, my copy kind of didn't have it, but there was some really weird stuff going on with gapping in between the hair. I believe it was literally right there, where you could actually see a hole inside the figure, which is obviously not a good thing. I'm very thankful that my copy of the figure didn't have that. Otherwise, it may have even been higher on this list with my distaste for this. But with those QC issues in mind, and this sculpt just also kind of being like basic in terms of not only just the pose that we got for the figure, but everything going on with it, really the thing that kind of saved it from being any lower was probably the really cool thing that the Chojin Giga line did with the pants, which was obviously trying to emphasize on this sort of brush stroke, kind of like Shikashi art looking style that they did for the pants. But definitely not a bad figure. Like I said, this is more so like figures I was disappointed with this year, basically until we get to the top. But Gogeta, I'm sorry you had to be a part of this list, brother. Now, especially with this entry, I feel like you can tell that it was really hard for me to choose my least favorites of this year, because not only did I not review as many figures as I did last year, but I also didn't really review as many bad figures as I did last year. So coming in at number 4 is the Toyotaro Druid Bardock. Now, again, notice I'm saying Bardock here and not Goku, because yes, this figure is kind of a set, right? This is one of those things like the Tag Fighters line, where you can actually put these figures on the same stand, which is pretty cool if I do say so myself. Please excuse the dust. I really need to get better at that. And that's my New Year's resolution, bro. Get better at dusting. Anyhow, obviously putting these guys on the same stand is cool, because then you can get some really unique setups for figures, just like we have for this guy, where we have father and son doing a Kamehameha together. However, even though I really like the overall composition of this figure, and I actually quite like how these guys look together, I think, unfortunately, if we just let me just give him a little let me just give him a little tug here. We are left with Bardock by his lonesome, and I think you can see just by looking at this shot right here, this figure's posing is really awkward. Like, I just don't know when a character would ever be posed up like this. It just seems like such an odd way to have your character be. Like, is he flying? Is he jumping off the ground? It just sort of gives you that suspension of disbelief where it's like, I don't really know what he's supposed to be doing, and it doesn't really help with the fact that his hand is just in a really awkward position here. Obviously, the hand is made so that you can pair it with Goku, right, and just slap that right on there. And that looks pretty cool when it's together, but having him all alone just looks really odd. He just kind of looks really awkward by himself. Now, that's not to say that the figure's sculpting, you know, outside of the pose is bad by any means. I actually like Bardock's expression quite a bit. I like the fruit punch on this figure. I really like the battle damage on the armor that they have. Obviously, the cracks on the armor. Of course, this section right here is literally just big broken. On the back, even, we have some scratching and cracking, which I think is really cool. His tail sort of sitting around his body is nice. Obviously, we have the Saiyan armor broken here, which also works really well to connect to Goku. And of course, you know, his overall sculpt is just pretty good. The thing that does kind of stink, though, I will say, is that on his head, the bandana is just like, it is sculpted in a little bit, but it's really more so painted on, and they kind of just put some grooves in there to make it look like that it was a bandana. It's not the worst, but I definitely prefer on Bardock figures when they actually sculpt the bandana in there, because then you kind of are left with things like this, right? Where on the back he has the little hair tie, and it's like, okay, yes, I guess the bandana is going through his hair, but it doesn't really work, in my opinion. Like, it feels wrong, you know what I mean? Like, with a bandana doesn't go through your hair. Obviously, it goes over it, and I know that this is an anime, so it's of course not extremely accurate to real life, but overall, my man's just kind of a little bit awkward, if I'm being 100% that was actually one of the first figure unboxing. Definitely not a bad figure, and I think that it works a lot better. Wow, it's so cool that I get to open them up like one right after another, and they all like fit together in this nice little scene and all this stuff. And that is technically part of this line. Obviously not that set, because that's the Broly movie set. So just kind of unfortunate, and it shows me that this guy didn't do too well if they haven't made any other Ultimate Soldiers figures. Now, this figure is, because it kind of was like kind of the pinnacle of mediocrity, honestly. He's really nothing special. The only reason why I decided to pick this figure up at all is because this is technically a what-if figure. Obviously, Goku never goes Super Saiyan in his adult form in GT. If I'm wrong about that, you can definitely tell me in the comments. But at least as far as I know, that's the case, right? Obviously, this figure does also have the alternate version, where it is the base form Goku, and of course, you do see adult base form Goku in GT. Now, with this figure, I don't really think it's bad. Like I said, it's just very mediocre. The sculpting on it is okay. It's just nothing that really blows me away, right? It's like, yeah, it looks okay. The hair sculpt is just sort of okay. I don't really like the color that they used for it, though. It actually appears a lot lighter on camera, but it is still very light in real life. And it looks just more like, I don't really know how to describe the yellow. It's like almost, it's closer to white than it is to yellow, if that makes sense, even though it's still clearly yellow. The sculpt is okay. It definitely looks like a basket of French fries, if I'm being honest with you. It's not the best Super Saiyan hair sculpt that I've ever seen, and especially with his face. There's a really weird thing about this figure, is that I feel like the face looks good from some angles. Like, his eyes do look a little bit weird here, but I think this angle is sort of saved by the fact that obviously you can't see his mouth, right? This angle looks very awkward because obviously, you know, his mouth is to the side and he's looking up. Just looks really weird. Obviously from like close-ups or like this, right? Like, this doesn't look too bad, but still a little bit awkward, right? And here is really the only way that you can see his full face because of the way that they sculpted the arms. It's really hard to get like his full, you know, facial expression on camera. And a lot of the time with figures, right, it really takes a good sculptor to get it right. When you have characters that are looking to the side like this, sometimes it looks pretty good and sometimes it looks awkward, and I think that this is one of those times where it looks awkward, especially with how the mouth is. Like, the teeth aren't really sculpted that well, and I feel like his mouth is almost too big, maybe? It is just really awkward, and again, like you see, I'm kind of struggling to get his face on camera here because it's just such an odd angle. The other thing that was a very unfortunate circumstance with mine, let me see if I can actually show you it. Yes, right there. I'll circle it on the screen. Mine actually had a crack in the sculpt, which I understand is not going to be on everybody's copy, but this was just another, Bandai quality control moment, am I right? So with that being there, that really kind of disappointed me because I was already sort of like in the middle about getting this figure, and then seeing that on my copy, I was like, at least it's like on this side of the mouth, so if you're looking at the figure like this, you don't really see it, which is good, but it shouldn't be there at all, you know? It's just like, and I don't really think that there would be too much difference even if I had the base form one. Obviously, I don't want to say that with 100% certainty because I don't own the base form version, but just a different hair color and a different eye color really doesn't make me want to not only get a second version of this figure being that one, it doesn't really give me any points for this bad boy here. So my boy, and I forgot, actually, I was going to give you a little outro, but I also just remembered there's also some disrespect going on with this figure because coming in at number 2, this one I am absolutely positive that none of you saw coming on this list. And this is where we get to really more frustrating than just kind of disappointing before we get to actually bad. Ladies and gentlemen, the Dokkan Battle 6th Anniversary Ichiban Kuji Goku Black. What? Huh? What? Crazy! You did not see that one coming. I know that for a fact. The comment section is shaking right now. Yes, I am actually going to be putting the, technically Zamasu, parentheses Goku Black, but you get the point. Goku Black, Dokkan Battle at the number 2 for me personally. Now, I have a multitude of reasons why this figure is this high up. The sculpt is not the problem. I do still think that his face could use a little bit of work, right? It's definitely not the worst Goku, or I guess in this case, Goku Black face that I've ever seen, right? It's definitely not that bad. It could be better, and I definitely think that it still looks like Goku Black. The menacing look looks pretty good, but it's a little bit off. And it doesn't really bother me that much, honestly. Like, it should more, I think, because it would on other figures. But I think that it really just doesn't bother me that much because I think I can still look at this and be like, okay, yeah, that's the boy, that's Goku Black. My problem with this figure is two main things. Well, actually, funny enough, now I'm also noticing something else that I wasn't going to say because I didn't even see it before, or didn't think to notice it. But obviously the paint smearing on this, but this might just be my copy. Again, QC issues are kind of a thing that I don't really like to use to judge a figure too heavily. It does contribute a little bit, but obviously, you know, it could just be my individual copy. Here is what is not just my individual copy, though. The connection to the stand for this figure is awful. It is terrible. So, first of all, let me just put this guy down and look at how much he wobbles like that. Here's the other thing too. When I'm holding this figure like this, look how loose he is, even if I hold the stand, right? Look how loose he is on the stand. That is terrible. As well, the stand itself really isn't that stable because of the weight of this figure and the way that it is weighted. This thing can fall over really easily. As you can see, sometimes the stand even stands back like this. Look at that. If I push this forward, bam, that's how it's supposed to be. But because of the way that the stand is made, you could actually accidentally be displaying this guy like this and have him maybe fall over. It is just a really weird base, despite it obviously looking pretty cool. And the problem with the connection is that the way that they engineered the connection for this guy is awful. Let me pull this off real quick. So the only way that this is connected is that there's a hole at the bottom of his foot. As well, with this, right, there is a single peg. It's having a hard time focusing on it because obviously it's so small. It is a single peg that is holding this into the stand, which is frankly unacceptable. Honestly, it's terrible. So then obviously on the clear part, we have the peg right there. You can see it right there. That's where it obviously plugs into the hole. And then in the front here, we have the peg hole for where the small peg goes into. So what you're supposed to do, and this is hard to get this on camera, but you're supposed to plug that into there and then push this back. And the problem is, not only is this really hard to do, because it's really hard to get the peg, let me see if I can get it, the peg lined up and then also push this in. Because the peg is so thin, I'm really scared of breaking it whenever I try and push it into the stand. Not to mention, because of how the peg is positioned, the foot doesn't go on the peg for the back foot all the way, right? It doesn't actually get flush, that's the word I was looking for, with the actual like PVC of the effect piece, right? It's not all the way on, and so that leads to a really unstable connection, as you can see, right? My boy is super wobbly, and that's just not something that you want with a really top heavy figure like this. It's just not good. On the shelf, I have to have this guy supported by like 2 or 3 other figures just to make sure that he doesn't fall over. I think once it's all put together and you have it standing there, right, it looks pretty good, but it's just that that combination really doesn't sit right with me. And I know the whole point of this line too is to have all these really cool effect pieces, but there is definitely a better way that they could have done this. I understand that his feet in this position would probably be hard to make a stand to get it to be in a way that there wouldn't be this kind of issue, but there is absolutely a better way than doing it like this with the peg. Even so, right, because you're looking at it like this, right, I understand what they were trying to go for was that his foot would sort of be like levitating, and that's why they have the peg there. Even if they had like a peg here to just put at the bottom of the foot, I would have rather had that as a compromise and then have his feet still look like this than have this really awful stand that he frankly could just fall over with. And you can see he like leans when you pick him up. And it also makes me a little bit scared to pick this guy up too, because I'm always afraid that the stand is going to fall off. And I don't know if you can tell, but yeah, it's not very stable. And with other figures with their stand, right, you literally don't have to worry about that. You could pick up the figure and know that it's absolutely fine, right? That looked easy for me sliding it on there, but I don't feel confident now that it's on there properly. The only other problem that I had with this guy was one more QC issue that my particular figure had that was actually very unfortunate. The black paint on the hair, as you can see here, had a really bad chip, and normally this wouldn't be too much of an issue, but not only is it glaringly obvious because under the figure it's white or silver there, but it's on literally like the foremost hair spike that you look directly at when you're looking at his face. So that was also really, really unfortunate for me. I will probably paint that, but I did want to talk about that in this video, so I left it on there this whole time. But yeah, that is Goku Black. Again, I do really, really like this figure a lot. I think that picking this guy for the Dokkan Kuji was a great choice, but man, they could have engineered a way better stand. And now, coming in at number 1, we have the Dokkan Battle Ichiban Kuji Gohan. Where is he? That's right, I don't even have him here. Just like last year with the worst figure, I don't even have the figure out because I put it away. He is in timeout. I am getting rid of this figure because it is just... oh, such a frustrating figure. So all of the footage that you're seeing is from the original unboxing video of Gohan. There are so many issues with this figure. Oh boy. So to start off, the figure doesn't really look like Gohan. Like, of course, the general composition of it is like, yeah, that's Gohan. But the face is really ugly. He was by far the ugliest face on all of the Dokkan Battle Ichiban Kuji figures this year. Easily the ugliest face. Definitely didn't look like Gohan. The eyebrows were sort of tilted in a little bit too far. They could have sort of leaned the edges of that V back a little bit, I think. And the teeth gritting also just didn't look that good. It looked really cheap, especially with the way that the white paint looked on the sculpt. Just not good. Of course, as well, we did have the sort of blue shading, which was actually something that was kind of a little bit okay on the figure, but the ball being attached to his hand, like, all of the other effects on the whole Ichiban Kuji line were really, like, explosive or extravagant, except for B-Pan, because she really didn't have anything. But with Goku's, right, he had those crazy effect parts. Trunks had the whole sword and the effects on his back, right? Goku Black had the base that we just talked about. And this man had a ball. Like, are you kidding me, bro? They literally just gave him a blue marble to hold on to. Like, that's not a Kamehameha. They could have easily put some effect parts on that, like the GX material line or something like that, to make it feel a little bit more impactful. The overall sculpt on the rest of the figure is not too bad. The hair does kind of look like banana hair, but it's definitely not the worst hair sculpt that I've seen overall. The stance isn't even that bad. He doesn't really lean too much. Obviously, it's based off of the Int LR Gohan art where he's walking forward. But I think my problem, honestly, with this guy, and frankly, this, I guess, could sort of be a problem with a couple of different figures that have come out this year. And I'm saving it. That's right. I'm giving you a sneaky, a surprise honorable mentions in here, because this is a problem with these guys as well. But my biggest issue, honestly, with this guy was the price, which is really weird to say, because on top of this just being an overall really disappointing figure, especially compared to the rest of the line, he was tiny, bro. You could fit that boy in your pocket, bro. Like, my fork that I'm eating dinner with tonight is bigger than Gohan. He is tiny. And the problem is, I understand Gohan is a small character. He's a kid in this scene, right? Despite everything calling him Teen Gohan, but I digress. He's a kid, right? He's like 12 in that scene. And he's tiny in this figure form. And the problem is, the figure is still $35. That's right. That giant Goku Black that I just complained about for the last 5 minutes, that guy's 35 bucks. At least he's not like bigger than my, just a hair bigger than my thumb, basically, right? At least he's a sizable figure. All of the other Kuji figures obviously were 35 bucks because that's the standard price for an Ichiban Kuji figure, 35 to 36. It's kind of been inflated to 36 recently. But for that price, for that size, unacceptable, bro. Especially with how disappointing the sculpt was. All of that culminating together really, really made me sad about this figure. Like, he basically looks like a bootleg with not only how small he is, but with the sculpt, and especially compared to the rest of the line. Like, wow, he is just the pinnacle of disappointment. It was just such an unfortunate way to cap off a really great Ichiban Kuji set, because I genuinely enjoy all of the other figures in the set. Like, I think they're all great. Despite how much I complained about Goku Black, you know, I still like the figure. But this is the only figure out of that Kuji set that I genuinely dislike, maybe even go as far to hate. So for me personally, out of the figures that I unboxed that were released in the year 2021, Gohan was by far the worst. Ladies and gentlemen, these are your worst figures of 2021 that I have unboxed that were dropped in the year 2021. Do you see why I called the title just the worst? Top 5 worst of 2021. That title would be ridiculous, bro. And just pretend Gohan's there in the corner. The PNG of him will just be chilling in the corner. I want to thank you guys so much for watching my figure unboxing content this year. I really, really appreciate it. Please let me know what were your top 5 worst figures of the year. Of course, you don't have to abide by the rules that I do. Just let me know what you thought out of everything that came out this year that was the lowest of the low, because I'm very curious to hear what you guys have to say. Because most of the time, a lot of people tend to agree on, like, oh, these were the best of the year. But I think the worst is pretty, like, much a mixed bag most of the time, it seems like. So really want to hear what you guys have to say on that. And of course, definitely check out that figure unboxing channel. Again, that is where I'm going to be moving all of my Dragon Ball figure unboxing content off of this channel onto this one. There will be a couple more videos just to make sure everybody gets to go to that new channel and subscribe. But I figured that this would be a good way to kick off that channel with these end of the year videos. As well, if you would like to support my figure collecting endeavors, of course, because that way I'm able to collect more figures as time goes on and continue making the figure unboxing content. You can do so on the old Patreon. Of course, please do not feel obligated. Your view is plenty and much appreciated. Obviously, that's the most important thing about this whole figure unboxing thing, is you watching the content and enjoying it. So thank you. Thank you if you do decide to support on the Patreon too, of course. Thank you guys so much for a fantastic year. I hope yours was good. Happy New Year, of course. And I will see you guys in the best of 2021. Dokkan Assets out. Peace.